We finally get Ultimate Superior Spider-Man in the new Ultimate Universe from Jonathan Hickman. What's going on, guys? This is Rob, and we are back with Ultimate Spider-Man. So, we're picking up with a 3-month time skip after the end of the last issue. And while we didn't technically cover number 21, there wasn't a whole lot that happened in that story. It was technically the origin of Mr. Negative, which we can cover it if you want to, but the real meat and potatoes of that comic, and what really mattered in that comic, was the fact that Mr. Negative had basically taken Quentin Beck, a member of the Council of Mysterios, and because Mr. Negative has the ability to dominate the wills of others, he forced Quentin Beck to reveal everything, and then sent Quentin Beck back to the Council of Mysterios, and then had him basically take himself out, right, with explosives, killing Gwen Stacy and all the other Mysterios in the process. And so 3 months after that, you basically pick up with Spider-Man swinging through the city. And here's a funny thing, right? He's actually heading to a Chinese joint. And he just tells them, right, like, make sure there's soy sauce in this food. Jonathan Hickman is nothing if not very particular about the small moments in Marvel Comics. But the cool thing is that as he's heading back, he just kind of makes this statement, right? Because he's basically going underground, and he says, the depths to which I sink, hiding deep in the earth, beneath the great behemoth of the city, like something small and inferior, when I am so much more, when I am so very superior. And that's when he arrives back at what's basically the Savage Land. Right now, that's one of the things that we learned earlier in the Ultimate Spider-Man comics, is that the Savage Land in the new Ultimate Universe is not located down in Antarctica. It's actually just below the city of New York, down in the sewer system. And of course, it's ran by Mole Man. And so what ends up happening is that when Spider-Man arrives back, you end up finding out it's Otto Octavius, it's Dr. Octopus, and what they're doing is actually running a bit of a ruse here. The idea being that what Otto Octavius does by operating as Spider-Man is he protects Peter Parker's identity. That was the big issue that Peter had to contend with. Eventually, somebody would put it together, and seemingly people had, but somebody would put it together that every time Peter Parker's gone, Spider-Man is over there. So the best thing for them to do is to have Peter over here and Spider-Man over there, right? Creating just a very simple distraction and a bit of confusion for those who felt like they were on the trail of Peter Parker's identity. So it is cool to see that Otto is officially taking on the mantle of Ultimate Spider-Man. Now, it doesn't really seem like it's spinning out into a great big huge thing, but the fact is that what's also happening at the same time is that J. Jonah Jameson and Ben Parker, again, running their own independent news organization, are basically preparing a media package, right? Getting ready to like fire this thing out into the world. That is the only thing that anybody's going to be talking about, because one of the undercurrents of Jonathan Hickman's run on Ultimate Spider-Man is that they had actually been going through and piecing together bits of information that they could find from whatever sources they could pull from, which also included Gwen Stacy, that basically exposed the truth of what the Kingpin was doing. And that's kind of an important element of what's going on with the Ultimate Universe at the moment, because, well, it is technically ending, and in fact, they're going to kill the comic when everybody reaches issue number 24. No idea why, right? Marvel's publisher Dan Buckley was the one who made the call, so blame him. But the fact is that what was going on here was that, as we know, the Maker had kind of made this universe what it is. And while Kingpin works on behalf of the Illuminati, or the Maker's Council, that seemingly Ben and J. Jonah Jameson and even Spider-Man are kind of removed from it all, right? They're just sort of doing their thing in New York over there. Whereas you have the Ultimates and all these guys who are kind of doing their thing over here. Presumably it's all going to come together in a fight against the Maker, but we don't necessarily know because now all the writers had to fast track the ending. But the fact is, right, Otto asked the question, how much longer? And that's where Ben just simply says a couple of hours, right? We could be ready to go tonight. But Jameson, of course, says like, we'll drop it first thing tomorrow and then throughout the day. It'll be the only thing that anybody's talking about. And that's where Otto tells them, right, just remember, there is a limit to how many bursts we can push out before the signal can be traced. I built all this as well as it could be done. But like I said, there are limits. Also, I got dinner. So they're basically broadcasting on a pirate signal, right, is really kind of what's happening here. And so once everybody's basically gathered around the table, of course, the question is, where's Peter and where's Harry Osborn? And so that's when you switch over to the two of them basically fighting Bullseyes. Now, unlike Bullseye as we're used to in the main Marvel Universe, where he's just kind of a crazed, highly skilled fighter who just loves killing people, Bullseyes in the Ultimate Universe are really more just henchmen than anything else. But this fight between Spider-Man, Harry, and the Bullseyes has less to do with like cleaning up the streets and basically taking shots at Kingpin and ultimately working their way closer to them, is taking out frustration. Because with Gwen Stacy dead, right, Harry Osborn is just in a fit, right? This guy is in a lot of ways losing it, psychologically as well as emotionally. Now, Peter does make some references to the fact that, like, these bullseyes don't really seem to have developed any upgrades whatsoever. He literally says, we've been smashing these guys for over a year. You'd think by now they'd have learned their lesson or at least gotten some new upgrades, only for one of them to pop an eye patch and then blast Peter with basically a laser out of his eye. So that's kind of cool. And Peter's like, okay, so that was my bad. I probably should have seen that coming. My mistake, bro. But that's where Harry's just kind of like, it's no problem, right? Like, I happen to have gotten some upgrades of my own. And he literally fires off a device that just electrifies everybody, right? And that's where Peter's like, I mean, it may have been a tad excessive, but it is cool. And coolness is really the only thing that matters. But again, right, kind of a shared moment between the two of them, which is really where we get the mental state of Harry Osborn here. Because with a 3-month time skip, we didn't really get the immediate aftermath of Gwen's death from Harry's perspective. He's just kind of been coping with it as time goes on. And so Peter just says, right, so like, what are all these guys doing here now? And that's where Harry's like, I wouldn't overthink it. Like, you see a bullseye, you hit a bullseye, be home in time for dinner. And that's where he tells Peter, like, if you hurry, you can still make it. And Peter invites him. He's like, dude, come back to dinner, man. Like, come back to the house, get some food with the family. Like, it'll help to be around everybody. But Harry kind of shuts him down, right? He's like, all it does is remind me that you've got a great family, and I do not. Not anymore. Plus, one can only take so much of Otto Octavius, which is a true statement, right? Whether it's the main Marvel universe or the Ultimate Universe, you got to take him in small doses. He's like a buddy of mine, Dustin. And so that's when Peter's just kind of like, I mean, look, like, come on, man. But the response of Harry, right? Like, really, Pete, it's fine. Gwen's gone, and I miss her. But what else am I going to do besides this? Now, this is a very important thing here, because this is one of those kind of forks in the road to a degree. And I would have been curious to see how this whole thing would turn out with Harry Osborn, because this is a path that Harry is setting himself down, where in moments of grief, it's much better to reach out to people. It's how you maintain your humanity, and you kind of keep that feeling that, like, you're not alone, isolated in the world. But with Harry Osborn, he's just kind of isolating himself. And it is easy to do, right? I mean, full transparency here. It is very easy to do. Isolate yourself, shut the world out while I deal with these kinds of things on my own. And for some people it works, right? But for Harry Osborn, being around people seems to be the thing that he would need, because he's experienced so much loss and sacrifice. His dad's dead, his mom's dead. Now his wife was just killed in a pretty brutal fashion. These are not small things. But at the end of the day, Peter respects the wishes of his friend. And so he says, promise me, you will yell if you need me. And that's where Harry's just like, I mean, the comms are working fine. So if I yell, you better come running, right? And Peter's just like, I mean, if you yell, I will 100% be there. And so once Peter's gone, Harry just says, it's all clear. And that's where this voice comes out of nowhere and says, what a tangled web we weave. When first we practice to deceive. I am so proud of you, son. Now, that's an important thing to know here, right? That when Otto Octavius was basically assembling these suits, right? Or at least modifying these suits for Peter and for Harry, he also gave Harry an AI, which was an AI of his father. The issue with this is that almost as soon as it pops up, it kind of becomes the overbearing Norman Osborn that we're traditionally used to, which seems a little manipulative. And so you combine that with Harry Osborn losing his wife Gwen, it's a recipe for the traditional Green Goblin persona, right? Like one personality whispering in his ear, coupled with the feeling of loss and feeling lost, that can be very problematic. And so he just simply tells, right, his father's voice, I want him safe. There is nothing more to it. And that's where this voice just says, of course. And why wouldn't you lie to him if all you're going to do is lie to yourself? And so at that point, you switch back over to Otto, who's essentially working in his lab. And in talking to somebody that we can't readily see, he says, you see, I've studied how the people who really run this world operate. I've studied them. I've studied their methods. And more than that, I've studied their master, the great Maker. Now, this is an interesting point because it shows that Otto Octavius has kind of been doing what Peter Parker has not been doing. Peter's been so focused on being Spider-Man and protecting his family from whatever threats the Kingpin was throwing at them. He was never really sitting down and looking at the bigger picture. Otto's been doing it this entire time. And he says, a great builder of societies, a great builder of machines. It took some time, a deep dive into all the records that Stain Stark possessed, and following all those threads, to their origin. There's a string at the center of the world. It connects to a series of nodes that all connect to the Maker's fabled city itself, an ocean of knowledge that all rivers flow to. And I've built this to infect it. Now, this is a huge revelation within the Ultimate Universe, and here's the reason why. When everything popped off in Ultimate Invasion, and the Maker was ultimately defeated, right? That Norman Osborn trapped inside the city, presumed dead, that the Maker trapped inside the city and most likely is alive, that when the city dome shut, and they were all just kind of concealed in there, and then Jonathan Hickman gave us a 2-year window in saying, at the end of 2 years, the dome will reopen, the Maker will reemerge, and God help everybody on Earth, because who knows what the Maker's been doing that entire time, because time passes differently within the city, that we largely assume the Maker and all those guys were cut off, right? But this changes everything, because when there's a statement here, right, that it connects to a series of nodes that all connect to the Maker's fabled city itself, seemingly the Maker's watching everything. He's not isolated from the world. He won't reemerge having no idea what's going on. That seemingly he knows everything that's happening. And if Norman Osborn truly is alive within the city, that would explain that what Otto Octavius is doing is actually creating a way in which Norman Osborn can communicate with Harry Osborn. Now again, it is largely just an AI, but the fact is, right, a way in is a way out. If nodes send information to the city, information from the city can be sent back out again. And so that's what's cool, because it turns out that Otto is actually talking to Richard Parker. He's talking to the son of Peter. And Richard just asks, right, what is it? And Otto just says, a worm, a subtle self-replicating parasite that eats the tiniest portion of all that knowledge. Put this device in the right place and it will erase any existing, and more important than that, any future acquisition of information regarding your family. And Richard's like, and I mean, it'll erase any information about you too, right? And Otto's like, of course, along with any of our other small number of allies. So basically, he's talking about Felicia Hardy, because that's the girl that Richard Parker is essentially in love with. And so Richard asked the question, right, what's the catch? Because if this were just a beacon that you could activate, you would have activated it already and just left it down here or put it someplace that has nothing to do with us so no one could locate us easily. But that's where Otto just says it has to be connected to one of the Maker's nodes. And the only accessible one on this continent is located in the heart of the Kingpin's empire. If only there was someone brave enough to do this. And that's where Richard's like subtle, because those of you guys who have been following Ultimate Spider-Man know that Richard Parker is an answer to the question, what if you or I got powers? We would 100% get into mischief. Oh, absolutely. If we were teenagers and we got superpowers all of a sudden, yeah, man, we'd get into mischief. We'd probably use them to impress girls or guys, whoever you're attracted to. But like, we would basically try to become celebrities. Right? And that's kind of the funny thing, is Otto's just kind of like, all seriousness, right? All joking aside, it needs to be done. Right? And so Richard's just like, then why don't you do it instead of trying to get me grounded again? And that's where Otto says, because to get to the node, someone would need to break into one of the most secure vaults in this hemisphere. And in fact, one could argue that only one of the greatest thieves in the history of the world could pull off something like this. Do you know anyone like that? Of course, Richard does, right? It's Felicia. And of course, at that point, we switch over to her character, and she's just essentially overlooking Fisk Tower, which leads to the arrival of Richard. And of course, she asks the question, like, what are you doing here? Right? And he simply just says, 1, I was actually looking for you. And 2, believe it or not, I am on a mission. And he says, I'm supposed to break into that building and place this device where it needs to go. I could save my family, and I made sure that it could also save you. So I'm doing it. And there's nothing Kingpin can do to stop me. And so she says, like, you should know, I've followed Mr. Negative here. And that's where Richard is just kind of like, I mean, I'm still going, right? But I really could use your help. Do you want to get into some trouble? And she's like, definitely. Because Felicia has a bone to pick. But here's the crazy thing, right? And here's where this story really feels like it goes sideways. Because at that point, you switch over to a different location, and you've got Harry Osborn just monitoring this building. And the question's asked, is he in there? And Harry just says, yes. And it's like he doesn't even care what I've done. He says, I see a dozen more enhanced humans and the target 2 floors down from the roof. And that's where this voice just says, time to go in. And they ask, Are you with us? And it turns out this is an amalgamation of Mysterios. Now, here's the crazy thing. It doesn't really look like Gwen is actually a part of it, or if she is, it's just kind of her mind. But here's the crazy thing. It kind of feeds back to the nature of the Mysterios. Instead of them simply referring to themselves and saying that we are Mysterio as a council, now they are Mysterio as a gestalt entity. And that's kind of wild, because where we could say that Harry's mind is breaking, that he's kind of going insane, he's seeing things that aren't really there. This is how he imagines Gwen living on in some twisted capacity. The reflection of Mysterio is in his helmet. So what we're seeing is actually real. With that being said, guys, we're going to bring this to an end. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, drop a like. Thank you all for watching, and I will catch you all later. Peace.